Okay, Chapter 3 of the Foxhole Court. Neil spotted the Foxhole Court long before they made it to the stadium parking lot. Built to seat 65,000 fans, it had been placed on the outskirts of campus, where it could tower over the shorter utilities buildings nearby. The paint job only made it stand out more. The walls were a blinding white with obnoxiously bright orange trim. A gigantic fox paw was painted on each of the 4 outer walls. Neil wondered how much it cost the university to build and how desperately they regretted the investment, considering the Fox's miserable return. They passed 4 parking lots before turning into a 5th. There were a couple of cars already there, probably for maintenance staff or summer school students, but none were parked at the curb closest to the stadium. The stadium itself was surrounded by a barbed wire fence. Gates were placed equidistant down the length of the fence for handling a game night crowd, and all of them were chained shut. Neil went up to the fence and stared through it at the outer grounds. It was deserted now, the souvenir stands and food stalls boarded up until the season started again. But he could imagine what it looked like in a couple months. It made every hair on his body stand on end, and his heartbeat echoing in his ears sounded like an Exy ball rebounding off a court wall. Nicky clapped a hand to Neil's shoulder. "All the orange grows on you," he promised. Neil twisted his fingers through the metal links and wished he could break the fence down. "Let me in." It's like that meme. "Let me in." "Come on," Nicky said, and led him down the fence. They'd reached the end of the gates. They'd parked by 24, and the next was 1. Between the 2 gates was a narrow door sealed with an electronic keypad. The door led to a hallway that cut the outer grounds in 2. Whoever made it as far as gate 24 would have to go into the stadium and through the stands to reach gate 1. The others were waiting for Nicky and Neil outside that door. Aaron had brought the whiskey with him. "This is our entrance," Nicky said. "Code changes every couple months, but Coach always lets us know when it does. Right now, it's 0508, May and August, get it? Coach and Abby's birth months. Told you they were boning. When's your birthday?" "It was in March," Neil lied. "Oh, we missed it. But we recruited you in April, so that should count as the world's greatest present. What'd your girlfriend get you?" Neil looked at him. "What?" "Come on, cute face like yours has to have a girlfriend. Unless you swing my way, of course. In which case, please tell me now, and save me the trouble of having to figure it out." Neil stared at him, wondering how Nicky could care about such things when the stadium was right there. They knew the code to get inside, but they were standing around like his answer was the secret password. Neil looked from Nicky to the keypad and back again. "What's it matter?" he asked. "I'm curious," Nicky said. "He means nosy," Aaron said. "I don't swing either way," Neil said. "Let's go in." "Bullshit," Nicky said. "I don't," Neil said, and impatience put an edge in his voice. It wasn't quite the truth, but it was close enough. "Are we going in or not?" In response, Kevin tapped in the code and pulled the door open. "Go," he said. Can I be... What in the world? Okay. Neil didn't have to be told twice. He went down the hall, already turning his key ring over in his hands. The hall ended at another door marked Foxes. He showed the key ring to Kevin in silent question. Kevin fingered the appropriate key. I don't like that wording. It was strange sliding it into the knob and listening to the lock clack undone. Coach Hernandez occasionally let Neil sleep in the Millport High locker room, but it never occurred to him to give Neil a key. Instead, he looked the other way whenever Neil broke in. Keys meant Neil had explicit permission to be here and do what he liked. They meant he belonged. The first room was a lounge. 3 chairs and 2 couches took up most of the space, forming a semicircle around an entertainment center. The TV was obscenely large, and Neil couldn't wait to watch a game on it. Posted above the TV on the wall was a list of sports and news channels. The rest of the walls were covered in photographs. Some of them were official, team photos, snapshots of the Fox's goals, and pictures obviously clipped from newspapers. The majority of the pictures looked like they'd been taken by one of the Foxes themselves. These were scattered anywhere they could fit and held up by tape. Taking up one entire corner was a clump of photos featuring the Fox's 3 ladies. Exy was a co-ed sport, but few colleges wanted women on their lines. According to Fox lore, Palmetto State refused to approve any of the women Wymack asked for his first year. After the Fox's train wreck first season, they were a little more willing to listen, and Wymack signed 3 women. On top of that, he made Danielle Wilds the first female captain in NCAA Class I XC. Yay, we're getting introduced to the women. Let's see if my tea is still too hot. It is too hot. Okay, I'll continue. If XE fans weren't kind to the Foxes, they were downright cruel to Danielle. Even her teammates were willing to shred her in public during her first year. The more outspoken misogynists blamed her for the Foxes' failings. Despite the controversy and with only Wymack at her back, Danielle held onto her position. 3 years later, it was obvious Wymack made the right choice. The Foxes were still a mess, but they fell in behind Danielle and slowly started racking up wins. Neil's mental picture of Danielle was that of an aggressive and unrelenting woman, but the pictures he was looking at undermined that impression. Danielle was smiling in every photo, a toothy grin that was equal parts menace and mirth. Nikki noticed his distraction and tapped the faces in the closest photograph. Dan, Renee, and Allison. Dan's good people, but she'll work you to the bone. Allison's a catty bitch. You should avoid at all costs. Renee's a sweetheart. Be nice to her. Or else? Neil asked, because he could hear it in Nikki's tone. Nikki only smiled and shrugged. Let's go, Kevin said. Neil followed him out of the lounge. A hallway led from the lounge past 2 office doors labeled David Wymack and Abigail Winfield. A door with a simple red cross on it was next. Further down, 2 doors opposite each other were marked ladies and gentlemen. Kevin pushed open the gentleman door a bit, showing Neil a quick glimpse of bright orange lockers, benches, and tiled floor. Neil wanted to explore, but Kevin wasn't slowing on his way down the hall. The hall dead-ended at a large room Neil dimly remembered from news clips. It was the room that opened into the stadium and the only place where the press could meet Foxes after games for interviews and photographs. Orange benches were set here and there, and the floor was white tile with orange paw prints. Orange cones were stacked in a corner, 3 deep and 6 high. A white door on the wall to Neil's right and an orange door was opposite to him. And a white door was on the wall to Neil's right and an orange door was opposite to him. My goodness. Welcome to the foyer. Foyer? Nikki said. That's what we call it anyway. By we, I mean whatever clever smartass preceded us. Andrew straddled one of the benches and dug a bottle of pills out of his pocket. Aaron handed Kevin the whiskey they'd snitched. Kevin brought it to Andrew, waited while Andrew shook a pill onto the bench in front of him, and traded him the whiskey for the pill bottle. The medicine disappeared into one of Kevin's pockets, and Andrew swallowed the pill with an impressive swig of whiskey. Kevin looked at Neil and gestured to the plain door across the room. Gear closet. Can we? Neil started. Kevin didn't let him finish. Bring your keys. Neil met him at the orange door and let Kevin pick out the right key. The other side of the doorway was darkness. There wasn't a ceiling, but Neil could see the walls rising up on either side. Neil followed Kevin into the shadows. 10 steps later, he realized they must be in the stadium itself. You get to see the Foxhole court looking its best, Nikki said behind him. We made enough money off Kevin's presence. We could get the floors refurbished and walls done. Cleanest this place has been since year 1. Light from the locker room bled into the stadium. The path to the inner court was too long for it to be much help. Inner court was mostly inky shadows and vague outlines. Neil closed his eyes and tried to imagine it. This space was reserved for the referees, cheerleaders, and teams. Somewhere around here were the Foxes' home benches. The plexiglass walls surrounding the court were invisible in the dark, as was the court itself, but knowing the court was there set Neil's heart racing. Lights, Aaron called from somewhere behind him. Now can I drink my tea? Can I drink my tea? Put too much sugar in it. Okay. Neil heard the hum of electricity before the lights came on, starting with emergency lights at his feet and cascading upwards. The stadium came to life before his eyes, row after row of alternating orange and white seats disappearing into sky-high rafters and the court lighting up in front of him. Neil was moving before the ceiling lights turned on, crossing the inner court to the court walls. He pressed his hands to the thick, cold plastic and looked up, where the scoreboards and replay TVs hung over the court ceiling, then down to the glossy wood. Orange lines marked first, half, and far court. It was perfect, utterly perfect, and Neil felt at once inspired and horrified by the sight of it. How could he possibly play here after playing on Millport's pathetic knockoff court? He closed his eyes and breathed in, breathed out, imagining the way bodies sounded as they crashed into each other on the court, the way the announcer's voice would only come through in muffled, scattered bursts, the roar of 65,000 people reacting to a goal. He knew he didn't deserve this, knew beyond a doubt he wasn't good enough to play on this court, but he wanted and needed it so badly he ached all over. For 3.5 weeks, it would be just the 5 of them, but in June, the Foxes would move in for summer practices, and in August, the season would begin. Neil opened his eyes again, looked at the court, and knew he'd made the right decision. The risks didn't matter. The consequences would be worth it. He had to be here. He had to play on this court at least once. He had to know if the crowd screamed loud enough to blow the roof off. He had to smell the sweat and overpriced stadium food. He needed to hear the buzzer sound as a ball slammed inside the white goal lines and lit the walls up red. "Oh," Nikki said, leaning against the wall a short ways down from Neil. "No wonder he chose you." Neil looked at him, not really understanding the words, not really listening, when his mind was still racing with the tick-tick-tock of a game clock sounding down. Tick-tick-tock? I don't know. Past Nikki was Kevin, who'd watched his father take a man apart and gone on to sign with the national team. Kevin was watching him, but the second their eyes met, he pointed back the way they'd come. "Give him his gear." Aaron and Nikki brought Neil back to the locker room. Andrew hadn't followed them into the stadium, but he wasn't in the foyer either. Neil didn't care enough to ask, but followed the cousins into the changing room. The front room was lined with lockers, each one marked with the players' numbers and names. Through the doorway at the back, Neil could see sinks, and he assumed the showers were around the corner out of sight. He was more interested in the locker that had his name on it. Coach Hernandez and Wymack had spent the last few weeks of Neil's senior year arguing details on what sort of equipment Neil needed. Knowing that everything was going to be there for him wasn't half as good as seeing it. There were 5 outfits for workouts and a set of both home and away uniforms. Mounds of padding and armor took up most of the space in his giant locker, and his helmet was on the top shelf. Underneath the helmet was something neon orange and shrink-wrapped, and Neil carefully pulled it out to examine it. It opened to reveal a windbreaker that was almost brighter than the stadium paint. Foxes and Jostin were printed on the back in reflective material. "Satellites can pick these up in outer space," he said. I forgot, I need to do my Neil voice. "Satellites can pick these up in outer space," he said. Nikki laughed at that. Dan commissioned them her first year here. She said she was tired of everyone trying to look past us. People want to pretend people like us don't exist, you know? Everyone hopes we're somebody else's problem to solve. He reached out and fingered the material. They don't understand, so they don't know where to start. They feel overwhelmed and give up before they've taken the first step. Nicky gave himself a small shake and smiled, melancholy instantly replaced by cheer. "You know we donate a portion of ticket sales to charity? Our tickets cost a little more than anyone else's because of it. Renee's idea. Told you she's pure gold. Now come on, let's get you looking foxy." He turned away to find his own gear, so Neil pulled out what he needed and brought it to the bathroom. Changing out in a stall was awkward and uncomfortable, but he'd done it so many times he had it down to an art form. He traded out a t-shirt for shoulder and chest padding. He did a couple twists to make sure the straps were snug enough without being too tight, then tucked his jersey on over top. He could put on shorts around the others, so he returned to the main room to finish dressing. He traded jeans for shorts first, then sat on one of the benches to hook his shin guards into place. He covered those with long socks and put on scuff-free court shoes. He pulled thin cotton gloves on, snapping them closed just above his elbows, then strapped arm guards onto his forearms. He left his outer gloves by his helmet where he could carry them down to the court, and pulled his bangs up under an orange bandana. The last thing to put on was his neck guard, a thin band with a tricky clasp. It was a pain to deal with and occasionally made him feel like he was choking, but it was worth putting up with if it'd protect his throat from a stray ball. They went back to the foyer, and Nikki and Neil unlocked the gear door Kevin indicated earlier. I said Neil instead of Nikki in the last live stream once. Sorry about that. Oops. Aaron got a bucket of balls while Nikki rolled out the stick rack. The rackets were arranged by numbers, a pair for each player with Neil's at the end. Neil unhooked one and gave it a slow spin, testing the weight and feel of it in his hand. It was dark orange with a single white stripe at the base of the head and white rope netting. It smelled brand new and felt like a dream, and it was all he could do to keep from smashing the taut net against his face. At Millport, he'd used one of the older team rackets. This one had been ordered specifically for him, and the thought alone was enough to set his heart racing. Kevin was right where they'd left him, waiting for them in the inner ring. He watched silently as they tugged on their helmets and gloves and said nothing when Aaron led the way to the home court entrance. Neil used his last key to unlock the door and then stuffed the keys into his glove for safekeeping. After the door closed behind them, Neil looked at Nikki and asked, "Is Kevin not going to play today?" Aw. I'm reading all through the game because I don't like the audiobook. But I don't know that I'm any better. But I will get better. And once I get better, I'll read Don May. And then I'll come back and redo this. After the door closed behind them, Neil looked at Nikki and asked, "Is Kevin not going to play today?" Nikki looked surprised that he'd ask. Kevin only tolerates our court under 2 conditions, alone or with Andrew on it. He'll have to get over it this fall when Renee's in goal at games, but for now he can get away with being a snob. Where's Andrew? He just dosed up, so he's out cold somewhere. He's going to crash and reboot in a crazy mode. You don't think he's crazy now? Crazy? Nah, Nikki said. Soulless, perhaps. Neil looked at Aaron, waiting for him to defend his twin, but Aaron only led the way to half court. Neil kept pace with Nikki, idly poking his fingers through the netting on his racket. He looked at Kevin, who was still watching them through the court wall, and asked, "Kevin can't really play, can he? They said it'd be a miracle if he ever picked up a racket again." "His left hand's pretty much out," Nikki said. "He's playing as a righty from now on." Neil stared. "What?" Nikki grinned, obviously pleased to have dropped that bombshell. They don't call him an obsessive genius for nothing, you know. "It's not genius," Aaron said. "It's spite." "That too," Nikki said. "I wish I could see the look on Rico's face when he sees our first game. Rat bastard." Like, that's so funny. I didn't know he called him rat bastard. Kevin pounded on the wall in a demand for them to get moving. Nikki waved a hand at him in dismissal. "We're doing this in our free time, you know," he yelled. Not that Kevin could hear him through the court walls. "Thank you," Neil said belatedly. "Huh? Oh, no, don't worry about it. You can make it up to me some other time when the others aren't around." "Can you try and get ass when I'm not standing right here?" Aaron asked. "You could leave and let me and Neil get to know each other better." "I'll tell Eric on you." "Bald-faced lie. When's the last time you said a civil word to him?" Neil didn't know any Foxes, past or present, with that name. "Who's Eric?" "Oh, he's my husband," Nikki said happily. "Or will be eventually. He was my homestay brother for a year in Berlin, and we moved in together after graduation." Neil's heart skipped a beat. "You lived in Germany?" He tried to do the math in his head, guessing Nikki's age against how long ago he'd been in high school. Chances were Neil had already moved on to Switzerland by the time Nikki made it to German soil, but it was such a close call, Neil couldn't breathe. Ugh. Why do these people want to join the live? "Yeah," Nikki said. "You heard us earlier with the mumbo jumbo, right? That was German. The little punk studied it at high school because they knew it could help. Ugh. The little punk studied it at high school because they knew I could help them pass. If you take German as your elective here, just let me know and I'll tutor you. I'm good with my tongue." "Enough. Let's play," Aaron said, putting the bucket of balls down. Nikki gave an exaggerated sigh. "Anyway, remind me to show you his picture later. Our babies are going to be gorgeous." Neil frowned, confused. "He doesn't live here?" "Oh, no. He's in Stuttgart. Got a job he loves with great career potential, so he couldn't leave to follow me here. I was only supposed to stay long enough to get these kids through high school, but when Coach offered me a scholarship, Eric said I should go for it. It sucks being apart for so long, but he came here last Christmas, and I'll go there this year. If things ever die down around here, I'll even get to spend next summer in Germany." Nikki sent a meaningful look towards the wall where Kevin was watching them. They spent the next hour and a half teaching Neil drills. A lot of them Neil had done before, but there were a few he didn't recognize, and it gave him a thrill to learn something new. They ended with a short scrimmage, 1 striker against 2 backliners, and an open goal. Aaron and Nikki weren't the best defense players in the NCAA by far, but they were far better than any of the high schoolers Neil was used to playing. Aaron called them to a stop at last, and Neil caught the ball on a rebound. When he dropped it into the bucket, the others started unstrapping their helmets. Neil squished a flare of disappointment that they were done so soon, but he wouldn't push them to play any longer. Nikki had already said that they were giving up their summer break to play with him. Nikki smeared his cheek against his shoulder, trying to wipe sweat off onto his jersey. He smiled at Neil. "How's that?" "It was fun," Neil said. "You two are really, really good." Nikki beamed, but Aaron snorted. Kevin would kill himself if he heard that. "Kevin thinks we're a waste of oxygen," Nikki said with a shrug. "At least you're not going to completely drag us down," Aaron said. "It'll take most of the season to get you where you need to be, but I can see why Kevin picked you." "Speaking of," Nikki tipped his head toward the wall. Someone's ready to get his hands on you. Neil followed the gesture and looked through the wall towards the Foxes' benches. Andrew had reappeared and was lying flat on his back on the home bench, playing catch with the spare ball. Kevin had gotten his racket at some point and was spinning it as he watched them. With half the court and a half-inch thick wall between them, Neil could still feel Kevin's glare like a physical weight. Fear for your life, Nikki said. He's not a forgiving tutor, and he doesn't know how to be nice. Kevin can piss anyone off on an Exy court, up to and including a drugged Andrew. Well, anyone except Renee, but she's not human, so she doesn't count. Neil looked at Andrew again. I thought his medicine made that impossible. Spring was a learning experience. Nikki propped his racket against his shoulder and started for the door. Wish he'd seen it. Andrew would have taken Kevin's head off if Kevin hadn't already thrown Andrew's racket halfway across the court. I can't wait to see how you handle it. Fantastic, Neil said, grabbing the ball bucket and following them off the court. Andrew sat up as the court door banged closed behind them and tossed his ball to Nikki. He'd brought the whiskey with him and left it on the ground by his feet. Now he scooped it up and twisted the lid off. About time, he said. Nikki, it's so boring waiting on you. We're done now, Nikki said, hooking his helmet over the end of his racket so he could reach for the whiskey. About time you stop that, don't you think? Abby's going to beat me senseless if she realizes you've been drinking. Doesn't sound like my problem, Andrew said with a brilliant smile. Nikki looked to Aaron for help, but Aaron went ahead of them to the locker room. Nikki mimed blowing his own brains out and went with him. Neil meant to go after them, but he'd made the mistake of looking at Kevin. Once he met Kevin's eyes, it was hard to look away again. Kevin's expression was indecipherable. Whatever it was, it didn't look particularly happy. This is going to be a very long season. I told you I wasn't ready. You also said you wouldn't play with me, but here you are. Neil didn't answer that accusation. Kevin got right in his face and tangled his fingers through the netting on Neil's racket. When he started to pull it away, Neil held on tighter, silently refusing to let go. Kevin probably could have just wrenched it away if he tried a little harder, but he seemed content to just hold on. If you won't play with me, you'll play for me, Kevin said. You're never going to get there on your own, so give your game to me. Where is there? Neil asked. If you can't figure that out, there's no helping you, Kevin said. Neil gazed back at him in silence, pretty sure there didn't apply to someone like him. Kevin must have seen that in the unimpressed look on his face because he reached up and covered Neil's eyes with his free hand. Forget the stadium, Kevin said. Forget the Foxes and your useless high school team and your family. See it the only way it really matters, where Exy is the only road to take. What do you see? Imagining life in such simplistic terms was so ridiculous, Neil almost laughed. He kept the vicious twist of his mouth off his face through sheer willpower alone. Something still must have shown because Kevin gave his racket a hard tug. Focus. Neil tried to picture the world as if Neil Jostin was really all there ever had been and would be. It was almost enough to make him despise the persona when he could see it in such easy terms, but he swallowed that distaste and turned his mental gaze toward Exy. Had the game ever been his, or had it been pulling him to this point? Exy was the only bright point of his shattered childhood. He remembered his mother bringing him to Little League Exy games, traveling an hour outside of Baltimore to where no one knew his father and the coaches would actually let him play. He remembered her cheering for him, as if their every move and word wasn't scrutinized by gun-toting bodyguards. The memories were fragmented and dreamlike, distorted by the bloody reality of his father's work, but he clung to them. They were the only times he'd ever seen his mother smile. Neil didn't know how long he played with his Little League team, but his hands remembered the weight of a racket as well as they did that of a gun. The thought was sobering, as it put him right back to square one, and the fact that Neil Jostin was a fleeting existence. It was cruel to even dream he could stay like this, but Kevin had escaped, hadn't he? Somehow he'd left that bloody room behind at Edgar Allan and become this, and Neil wanted the same so bad he could taste it. You, Neil said at last. Kevin pulled at his racket again, and this time Neil let go. Tell me I can have your game. It wouldn't do them any good, but Neil wasn't going to get into that. Take it. Neil understands, Kevin said, dropping his hand and sending Andrew a pointed look. Congratulations are in order, I suppose. Since I have none to give, I will tell the others to respond appropriately. Andrew pushed himself to his feet and swallowed more whiskey on the way up. Neil, hello, we meet again. We met earlier, Neil said. If this is another trick, just let it go. Andrew grinned at him around the mouth of his bottle. Don't be so suspicious. You saw me take my medicine. If I hadn't, I'd be killed over somewhere by now, puking from the withdrawal. As it is, I might puke from all the fanaticism going around. He's high, Kevin told Neil. He tells me when he's sober, so I always know. How did you figure it out? They're twins, but they're not the same. Neil lifted one shoulder in a shrug. One of them hates your obsession with Exu, while the other couldn't care less. It's kind of like Hikaru and Kaoru. It's reminding me. Kevin looked at Andrew, but Andrew only had eyes for Neil. Andrew took a second to process those words before he started laughing. He's a comedian too? An athlete and a comic and a student. How multi-talented. What a grand addition to the Fox line. I can't wait to find out what else he can do. Perhaps we should throw a talent show and find out? But later. Kevin, we're going. I need food. Kevin handed Neil his racket back and the three went to the locker room. Aaron and Nikki were already in the showers when they arrived. Neil heard water running and sat on a bench in the changing room to wait. We're not taking you by Abby's like that, Kevin said. Wash up. I won't shower with the team, Neil said. I'll wait. And if you don't want to wait on me, just go on ahead. I'll find my way here from there. I'll find my way there from here. Whoop. Nikki gonna be a problem for you? Andrew asked. Neil didn't like the look of his manic smile, but he liked Andrew's veiled warning less. It's not about Nikki, it's about my privacy. Kevin snapped his fingers at Neil. Get over it. Can't be shy if you're gonna be a star. Andrew leaned toward Kevin and put a hand to his mouth, but he didn't bother to lower his voice. He has to hide his ouches, Kevin. I broke into Coach's cabinet and read his files. Bruises, you think? Or scars? I think scars, too. Can't be bruises if his parents aren't around to beat him, right? Neil felt cold all over. What did you just say? I don't care, Kevin said to Andrew, ignoring Neil. Andrew, in turn, ignored Kevin and gestured at Neil. Showers aren't communal here. Coach put in stalls when he built the stadium. The board wouldn't pay for it. They didn't see the point, so it came out of Coach's own pocket. See for yourself if you don't believe me. You don't believe me, do you? I know you don't. That's probably for the best. Neil barely heard him. You had no right to read my file. He regretted not flipping open the folder when Wymack put it down by him at the stadium. He couldn't believe Hernandez had said such things in his letters to Wymack. He knew Hernandez had to explain his situation, or at least as much as Hernandez understood it to be, to prove Neil was a fit for the Fox's halfway house team. Neil still felt betrayed, and on its heels was anger that Andrew had dug up those papers about him. Andrew laughed, sounding delighted to have crossed such a personal line. Relax, relax, relax. I made that up. We were locked in Coach's Arizona office to watch your game on the local TV station, and he said our secret meet and greet would be easy since you always shower alone last. I told Coach he still couldn't find your parents. Coach asked if they'd be a problem, and Arizona said he didn't know because he hadn't met them a single time. Said they spent a lot of time commuting to their jobs in Phoenix and no time at all checking in on you. But I'm right, aren't I? Neil opened his mouth, then closed it before he gave Andrew a piece of his mind. Andrew wanted him to react, so Neil had to reel it in. He sucked in a slow breath through gritted teeth and counted to 10. He only made it to 5 before Andrew's smile was too much. Neil didn't believe Andrew about the showers, but it was better to investigate than stay here and take a swing at Andrew. He got off the bench and went to the bathroom. The sinks with their ceiling-high mirrors were the connecting section between the toilets and the showers were around the corner out of sight. He edged around for a quick look. Andrew was telling the truth for once. The walls were lined with stalls, tall enough to afford complete privacy and outfitted with locking doors. Weird, right? Andrew said at Neil's ear. Neil hadn't heard his approach over the sound of the cousins' showers. Lashing out was instinctive, but Andrew caught the elbow Neil would have slammed into his ribs. Andrew laughed and retreated a couple steps. Coach never explained it. Maybe thought we'd need to grieve our disastrous losses in private. Only the best for his rising stars, right? I didn't think Wymack recruited rising stars, Neil said, pushing past Andrew for his locker. No, Andrew agreed. The Foxes will never amount to anything. Try telling Dan that, though, and she'll box your ears. He scooped up his whiskey and started for the door. Kevin, car. Neil watched the door close behind them before gathering his clothes and heading to the showers. He washed as quickly as he could and grimaced as he got dressed again. Vents kept the air moving, pulling moisture out to cut back on mildew, but the room still felt heavy and wet. Neil felt sticky as he tugged his clothes on. He raked his fingers through his hair as he met up with the cousins in the main room. They showed him where to put his armor so it could air dry and his uniform to be washed. Aaron got the lights on their way out, and Neil locked the doors, and they found the other two waiting by the car. Oh. Guys, if you missed chapter 1 and 2, I put it on my YouTube channel, where this is going to go. Okay. Aaron got the lights on their way out, Neil locked the doors, and they found the other two waiting by the car. Nikki took the keys from Andrew and shook them at Neil. It's your first day, so you get shotgun again. Enjoy it while you can. Kevin hates sitting in back. I don't have to sit up in front, Neil said. But Kevin and the twins were already piling into the back seat, and Kevin in the middle. The way they sat put Andrew behind Neil's seat, so Neil hoped the ride was short. Abigail Winfield lived in a one-story house about 5 minutes from campus. Nikki parked at the curb since there were already 2 cars in the driveway when they arrived. The front door was unlocked, so they let themselves in without knocking, and they were greeted by thick smells of garlic and warm tomato sauce. Coach Wymack and Abigail were in the kitchen already. Wymack was grumbling as he dug through the silverware drawer, and Abigail ignored him in favor of stirring something at the stove. Coach spotted the foxes first and stabbed a finger at Nikki. Hemmick, get over here and be useful for once in your Hemmick, get over here and be useful for once in your mangy life. Table needs setting. Aw, Coach, Nikki complained as Abigail turned. Why do you always have to pick on me? You already started it. Can't you finish? Shut your face and get to work. Can't you two behave when we've got a guest? Abigail asked, setting aside her spoon and coming to greet them. Wymack raked the group with a look. I don't see any guests. Neil's a fox. He's not going to get any special treatment just because it's his first day. Don't want him thinking this team is anything but dysfunctional, or June will be a rude wake-up call. David, shut up and make sure the vegetables aren't boiling over. Kevin, check the bread. It's in the oven. Nikki, table. Aaron, help him. Andrew Joseph Minyard, that had better not be what I think it is. She made a grab at the whiskey, but Andrew laughed and ducked out of the doorway. Abigail looked like she wanted to go after him down the hall, but Neil was in her way. He stepped neatly to one side to let her through, but she settled for flicking Nikki a murderous look. What was I supposed to do? Nikki asked, avoiding her eyes, as the three split up to their various chores. Take it from him? No way in hell. Abigail ignored him in favor of facing Neil. You'd be Neil then. I'm Abby. I'm nurse for the team and temporary landlord to this lot. They're not harassing you too much, are they? No worries, Andrew called from out of sight. He'll actually take work to break, I think. Give me until August, maybe. If you dare give us a repeat of last year, then B will be here to pick the pieces up, Andrew interrupted, reappearing in the doorway at Neil's side. He'd lost the whiskey along the way and splayed his empty hands at her in a calming gesture. She did so well with Matt, didn't she? Neil won't even be a blink on her radar. You did invite her over, didn't she? You did invite her over, didn't you? Andrew's lines are so hard for me. Oh my God. Okay. Let me retry that. She did so well with Matt, didn't she? Neil won't even be a blink on her radar. You did invite her over, didn't you? I invited her, but she declined. She thought it would make things awkward. Things aren't anything but awkward when Andrew and Nikki are around, Coach said. Andrew didn't even try to defend his honor, but looked at Neil. Bee's a shrink. Used to work in the juvie system, but now she's here. She deals with the really serious cases on campus, suicide watch, budding psychopaths, that sort of thing. That makes her our designated handler. You'll meet her in August. Do I have to? Neil asked. It's mandatory once a semester for athletes, Abby confirmed. The first time is a casual meet and greet, so you get to know her and find out where her office is. The second session is in spring. Of course, you're free to visit her anytime you like, and she'll talk to you about scheduling while you're here. Counseling services are included in your tuition, so you might as well make use of it. Betsy's amazing, Nikki said. You'll love her. Neil doubted it, but he let it slide for now. Let's eat, shall we? Abby asked, motioning for Andrew and Neil to enter the room. Neil had just about lost his appetite, but he sat at the table as far as he could get from Kevin and Andrew's seats. Conversation died as everyone got settled and served up what they wanted, but it started up again as they dug into chunks of steaming lasagna. Neil tried as best he could to stay out of it, more interested in seeing the way they interacted. From time to time, the table split as Kevin and Wymack got caught up talking about spring training and recruits at other schools, and Nikki regaled the other half of the table with gossip about movies and celebrities Neil didn't know. Andrew watched Kevin and Wymack, but he had nothing to contribute to the conversation. Instead, he hummed to himself and pushed his food around his plate. It was after 10 when Wymack decided it was time to go, and Neil left with him. Getting in the car alone with him was the hardest thing Neil had done all day. Andrew was crazy, but Neil had an ingrained distrust of men old enough to be his father. He spent the entire ride frozen and silent in the passenger seat. Maybe Wymack noticed the rigid set to his shoulders because he said nothing to Neil until they were back at his apartment. When Wymack closed and locked the front door behind them, he asked, Are they going to be a problem? Neil shook his head and discreetly put more space between them. I'll figure it out. They don't understand boundaries, Wymack said. If they cross a line and you can't get them to back off, you come to me. Understand? I don't have perfect control over Andrew, but Kevin owes us his life, and I can get to Andrew through him. Neil nodded and went back down the hall to get his bag from Wymack's desk. It'd been locked up all day, but he unloaded it onto the couch anyway to check his things. The second his hands closed over the binder at the bottom of his bag, his heart kicked into overdrive. He wanted to go through it and make sure everything was there, but Wymack was watching him from the doorway. You plan on wearing the same 6 outfits over and over again this year? Wymack asked. 8, Neil said, and yes. Wymack arched an eyebrow at him, but didn't push it. Laundry room is in the basement. Detergent's in the bathroom cabinet under the sink. Use what you need and take what you want from the kitchen. It'll piss me off more if you act like a skittish stray cat than it will if you eat the last bowl of cereal. Yes, Coach. I've got paperwork to go over. You good? I might go running, Neil said. Wymack nodded and left. Neil set his running pants to one side and stuffed his sleeping pants and tea under the couch for later. He changed in the bathroom and went around Wymack to lock his bag up again. Wymack didn't even look up from the papers he was perusing, though he grunted what might have been a goodbye as Neil left again. Neil locked the door behind him, stuffed the keys to the bottom of his pocket, and took the stairs down to ground level. He didn't know where he was or where he was going, but that was all right. If he gave his feet a direction, they'd take him running past all his thoughts, and he'd be happy to let them. Yay, we finished chapter 2. Oh, thank you. I'm really glad that you like the way I read. I'm working on it. It will get better. Especially doing different character voices. Okay, that is the end of chapter 3, and I think that might be all I read because oh, thank you. I'm glad what do you think about the voices? I know that I'm doing a better job at the women's voices than the other the guy who reads the audiobooks, but I think he does a much better Coach Wymack, obviously. And Loki, like, Andrew is hard. Mostly because his lines are so cheesy, but... Wait, you guys are making me feel happy. Maybe I'll do chapter 4 because I don't really have anything better to do. Okay, maybe I'll read like half of chapter 4. We'll see. When I get tired, I'm just going to stop. Okay, chapter 4. Neil spent the following morning exploring the campus and memorizing its layout. When he was sure he knew his way around, he left school grounds and went for a long run. Gradually, he looped his way back around. He had an hour to stretch out and eat lunch before he met the others at the stadium, but he made sure to show up early enough to change in private. Okay, thanks. When the others arrived, Neil was waiting for them on the court. He watched as Kevin propelled Andrew toward home goal. Andrew was laughing about something, but Neil couldn't hear what Kevin was saying to him. Aaron and Nikki scattered balls down the first, fourth line, and Nikki rolled a couple Neil's way. Neil spaced them out at half court around him. They started with drills, some of which Neil practiced yesterday and a few more he didn't know. The exercises gradually increased in difficulty, and Neil grimaced a little as Andrew deflected every shot Neil aimed his way. It was only a little comforting that neither Aaron nor Nikki was scoring either, but Kevin landed almost a third of his shots. It was a poor show from a former national champion, but it was also intensely humbling as Kevin had grown up playing left-handed. Seeing him take on Andrew right-handed was ballsy enough. Seeing him actually score was surreal. Kevin kicked him off the court for a water break after an hour and a half of drills, but instead of following the backliners and Neil to the locker room, he stayed behind with Andrew to keep practicing. Neil watched them over his shoulder. I saw him first, Nikki said. I thought you had Eric, Neil said. I do, but Kevin's on the list. The list is capitalized. Nikki said. When Neil frowned, Nikki explained. It's a list of celebrities we're allowed to have affairs with. Kevin is my number 3. Neil pretended to understand and changed the topic. How does anyone lose against the Foxes with Andrew in your goal? He's good, right? But Andrew sat out most of last year, Nikki shrugged. Coach didn't need a third goalie when he signed us, so Andrew was a bench warmer up until November. Then the ERC threatened to revoke our Class 1 status and fire Coach if we didn't start winning more often. Coach bribed Andrew into saving our collective asses with some really nice booze. Bribed? Neil echoed. Andrew's good, Nikki said again, but it doesn't really matter to him if we win or lose. You want him to care? You gotta give him incentive. He can't play like that and not care. My voice cracked. Andrew isn't possible. Exactly, like I never know when he's being manic or deadpan until I finish the line. Whew. Okay. You sound like Kevin. You'll find out the hard way, same as Kevin did. Kevin gave Andrew a lot of grief this spring, Nikki said as they pushed their way into the locker room. Aaron went ahead of them to get to the water fountain, and Nicky propped himself against the wall to watch Neil. Andrew walked off the court for an entire month. He said he'd break his own fingers if Coach made him play with Kevin again. The thought of Andrew willingly destroying his talent made Neil's heart clench. But he's playing now. Nicky took a couple quick sips from the fountain as soon as Aaron stepped out of the way and smeared a hand across his mouth. Only because Kevin is. Kevin got back on the court with a racket in his right hand, and Andrew wasn't far behind him. Up until then, they were fighting like cats and dogs. Now look at them. They're practically trading friendship bracelets, and I couldn't fit a crowbar between them if it saved my life. But why? Neil asked. Andrew hates Kevin's obsession with Exie. The day they start making sense to you, let me know, Nicky said, moving so Neil could get a drink. I gave up trying to sort it out. I gave up trying to sort it all out weeks ago. You could ask, but neither of them will answer. But as long as I'm doling out advice, stop staring at Kevin so much. You're making me fear for your life over here. What do you mean? Andrew is scary territorial of him. He punched me the first time I said I'd like to get Kevin too wasted to be straight. Nicky pointed at his face, presumably where Neil had decked him. So yeah, I'm gonna crush on safer targets until Andrew gets bored of him. That means you, since Matt's taken and I don't hate myself enough to try Seth. Congrats. Can you take the creepy down a level? Aaron asked. What? Nicky asked. He said he doesn't swing, so obviously he needs a push. I don't need a push, Neil said. I'm fine on my own. Take a shot. Seriously? How are you not bored of your hand by now? I'm done with this conversation, Neil said. This and every future variation of it. Look, Nicky, I have no problems with your sexuality, but I'm here to play. All I want from any of you is the best you can give me on the court. The stadium door slammed open as Andrew showed up at last. He swept them with a wide-eyed look, as if surprised to see them all there. Kevin wants to know what's taking you so long. Did you get lost? Nicky's scheming to rape Neil, Aaron said. There are a couple flaws in his plan he needs to work out first, but he'll get there sooner or later. You're such an asshole, Nicky said, as he started for the door. Wow, Nicky, you start... Oh my god, I hate this scene so much. I was just seeing if anybody had comments. Wow, Nicky, Andrew said, you start early. Can you really blame me? Nicky glanced back at Neil as he said it. He only took his eyes off Andrew for a second, but that was long enough for Andrew to lunge at him. Andrew caught Nicky's jersey in one hand and threw him hard up against the wall. Nicky grunted at the impact, but made no move to shove Andrew off when Andrew leaned up against him. Neil looked from Nicky to Aaron, but Aaron appeared unmoved and unsurprised by the sudden violence. Neil looked back at Andrew and waited to see how this played out. Hey, Nicky, Andrew said in a stage whispered German. Let me whisper that. Hey, Nicky. Hey, Nicky. I can't do it. Don't touch him. You understand? You know I'd never hurt him. If he says yes, I said no. Jesus, you're greedy, Nicky said. If you already have Kevin, why does it... He went silent, but it took Neil a moment to realize why. Andrew had a short knife pressed to Nicky's jersey. Where he'd pulled it from, Neil didn't know, but he refused to think Andrew wore one onto the court under his uniform. There had to be rules and regulations against that. The last thing Neil wanted was for Andrew to stab someone in the middle of a game. The Foxes would be banned from the league in an instant. Shh, Nicky, shh, Andrew said, like he was soothing a troubled child. Why the long face? It's gonna be okay. Neil was no stranger to violence. He'd heard every threat in the book, but never from a man who smiled as bright as Andrew did. Apathy, anger, madness, boredom, these motivators Neil knew and understood, but Andrew was grinning like he didn't have a knife point where it slipped perfectly between Nicky's ribs, and it wasn't because he was joking. Neil knew Andrew meant it. If Nicky so much as breathed wrong right now, Andrew would cut his lungs to ribbons. Any and all consequences be damned. Neil wondered if Andrew's medicine would let him grieve, or if he'd laugh at Nicky's funeral too. Then he wondered if a sober Andrew would act any different. Was this Andrew's psychosis or his medicine? Was he flying too high to understand what he was doing? Or did his medicine only add a smile to Andrew's ingrained violence? Neil looked to Aaron, waiting for him to interfere. Aaron was tense but quiet as he stared at Andrew's knife. Neil gave him another second, but he couldn't wait forever. He didn't know what would finally set Andrew off, and he didn't want to find out. Hey, Neil said, looking back at Andrew. That's enough. Quiet, Nicky said in English, barely louder than a breath of air. Quiet, it's fine. Hey, Neil said again, ignoring him, but he wasn't sure what to say. Questioning Andrew's sanity or calling his bluff would end with Nicky in the hospital. He wouldn't pretend to accept Nicky's advances just to calm Andrew down. What Neil needed was a distraction, something more important to Andrew than Nicky. That left only one thing that Neil knew of. One person, rather. Are we playing or what? He said. Kevin's waiting. Andrew looked at Neil as if that hadn't occurred to him. Oh, you're right. Let's go or we'll never hear the end of it. Andrew let go of Nicky and spun away. His knife vanished under his armor before he reached the door. Aaron squeezed Nicky's shoulder on his way out. Nicky looked shaken as he stared after the twins, but when he realized Neil was watching him, he rallied with a smile. But Neil didn't believe it all. Oh, that's so nice. I'm uploading these to YouTube if you guys want to watch them later. Out loud laughed. Hopefully I'll get better at reading. Okay, I think this one is already better than the last one. And I'm going to get a real mic too. It just isn't here yet. Okay. On second thought, you're not my type after all, Nicky said when the door closed behind his cousins. You need some more water before we hit the court for round 2? That's not okay, Neil said, pointing at the door. That's nothing, Nicky said. Neil caught his arm as Nicky passed and hauled him to a stop. Don't let him get away with things like that. Nicky considered him for a moment, his smile fading into something small and tired. Oh, Neil, you're going to make this so hard on yourself? Look, he said, tugging free and turning Neil toward the door. Andrew is a little bit crazy. Your lines are not his lines, so you can get all huff and puff when he tramples across yours, but you'll never make him understand what he did wrong. Moreover, you'll never make him care, so just stay out of his way. He's like this because you let him get away with it, Neil said. You're putting all of us at risk. That was my fault, Nicky said, opening the door and waited for Neil to precede him out. That was my fault. Nicky opened the door and waited for Neil to precede him out. I said something I shouldn't have, and I got what I deserved. Neil wasn't convinced, but he couldn't demand better explanations for an argument that had happened in German, so he led the way to the inner court. Neil looked first to Andrew, who was jogging to the half-court line, and then to Kevin, who was standing on the Foxhole logo at the court center. Aaron was at the door waiting for Nicky and Neil, and the three entered the court together. Kevin barely waited for them to stop at his side before dividing them up with a flick of his fingers. Aaron is with me, Nicky and Andrew get the child, 2-man team scrimmage with an empty away goal. I'm not a child, Neil said. You're only a year older than I am. 2, really, but he wasn't about to tell them he'd lied about his birthday and his age. Kevin ignored that, but Nicky spoke up. Shouldn't Andrew be with you and Aaron? Then Neil can practice shooting on him. Kevin looked bored by the suggestion. If I thought he could make it to the goal, I would have set it up that way. Them's fighting words, Nicky said, grinning at Neil. Bring it, kid. There were only 5 of them, but they set up as if they had 2 full teams. Neil and Kevin spaced out on the half-court line, Nicky at first fourth and Aaron at far fourth. Andrew acted as a dealer from his place in home goal and slammed the ball all the way to the other end of the court. The second Neil heard the crack of Andrew's racket, he started moving, pushing up before Aaron could close him out. Kevin should have done the same and pushed up the court toward Nicky, but he stayed on the half-court line. Likewise, Aaron let the rebound go past him. Neil didn't stop to think about it, but scooped the ball out of the air. He only had it for 2 seconds before Kevin appeared out of nowhere. Kevin smashed their rackets together so hard the ball popped one way and Neil's racket flew the other. Neil swore at the sharp pain that stabbed up his arms. Keep count, Kevin said before going after the ball. Neil scrambled for his stick and hurried after him, but Kevin's head start was too much. Nicky tried to fend Kevin off, but Kevin faked him out and scored a few seconds later. Andrew, who should have been guarding their goal, was using his oversized racket as a prop. He looked over his shoulder at the goal lines lit up red, but didn't react otherwise. You could at least try, Kevin said. Andrew thought about it, then said, I could, couldn't I? Maybe next time. Kevin caught the ball and tossed it to Andrew, who caught it with his goalie glove. The 4 set up to go again, and Andrew started them off with another vicious serve. This time, Kevin jogged to meet Nicky, leaving Neil to get past Aaron. Aaron ran for the ball, and to get past Aaron. Neil ran for the ball, and Aaron fell in alongside him on his way by. As soon as Neil was close enough to catch the ball, the body checking was a legal move, Aaron slammed into him full force. Neil stumbled, off balance, and ground his racket into the floor to stop himself from tripping over his own feet. Aaron caught the ball and threw it right over his head to Kevin. Andrew watched as Kevin scored again. What's Andrew doing? Neil asked. Nothing, Aaron said, as simple as it was obvious, and they set up for another serve. At the 20-minute mark, Kevin checked Neil into the wall and pinned him there with a gloved hand to his chest, long enough to demand, Are you even trying? Neil shoved him, but Kevin was already leaving, off to grab the ball and score again. It's a little Cabadon moment. I shipped Neil and Kevin so hard in the first book. I think like most people did. Or maybe it was, but also Kevin and Andrew. Okay. The court seemed so much larger when he only had one teammate to rely on, and the rules that only let them carry a ball for 10 steps made them rely heavily on the court's walls. Neil wasn't used to playing like this. He didn't like it, and his unfamiliarity with his style only made it easier for Aaron and Kevin to completely dominate the court. Each set forced Neil to try harder and go faster, but this wasn't Millport. His childhood experience and his speed weren't enough when facing athletes of this caliber. Neil was frustrated, then amazed, then frustrated all over again as the scrimmage wore on. He scored a couple of times during the scrimmage, but his goals felt worthless when he didn't have a goalkeeper to contend with. After 40 minutes, Kevin called them to an abrupt halt and swept his racket at the backliners. "Get out. Both of you, get out right now." "Thank God," Nikki said and ran for the door. Kevin waited until Aaron pulled the door closed behind them, then grabbed the grated front of Neil's helmet and dragged him toward Andrew's goal. Andrew finally took an interest in the proceedings and stood up straight. Kevin let go when Neil reached the fox paw, marking the foul line. "Ball," he said, and Andrew tossed it over. Kevin pushed it against Neil's chest until Neil took it. "You stay here and fire on Andrew until he's tired. Maybe you'll score once." "Uh-oh," Andrew said with a laugh. "This won't end well." Kevin turned around and left, slamming the door behind him on his way out. Neil collected the bucket of balls from the north home corner where they'd stored it during their scrimmage. He set the ball on first fourth and went back to the foul line for his first shot. Andrew, who hadn't lifted so much as a finger to stop Kevin from scoring on him, didn't have the same consideration for Neil. He swept his massive racket around in one long swing and hit the ball so hard Neil heard it bounce off the away court wall behind him. Neil looked over his shoulder, then took another ball from the bucket and tried again. Oh my God, I lost my place. Okay, Neil lost track of time after that. Swings and minutes blurred in an exhausting mix. He kept going long after his arm started burning because he didn't know how to stop. Eventually, the pain faded in favor of a heavy sense of numbness. He knew Andrew should be tired by now since Andrew had such a heavy racket and was hitting every ball like he wanted to score a home run, but Andrew didn't even slow down. He knew he'd gone too far when he took a swing and lost his grip on his racket. Andrew laughed as it clattered against the ground and skidded toward the goal. Andrew knocked the ball straight back at Neil, and Neil didn't have a racket to defend himself with. He brought up his arms to block his face instinctively, but he felt that sharp smack on his forearms, even through his arm guards. He stumbled back a step under the impact and shot Andrew a dirty look. "Let's go," Andrew said. "Tick-tock, I won't wait forever for you." Neil knew it was a bad idea, but he went for his racket anyway. Picking it up hurt, and when he tried to lift it high enough for a swing, his right arm gave a sharp spasm, and he lost his grip. His stick hit the court at his feet. "Oh no," Andrew said. "I think Neil's in trouble." Neil crouched and reached for his racket. It felt like his muscles were unraveling inside of him, twisting into tight balls around his elbow and wrist, but Neil wrapped his fingers around the stick and picked it up. Andrew stood his racket up in front of him and propped his arms on top of it, waiting and watching as Neil stupidly tried another shot on goal. Neil only got his racket shoulder height before he dropped it again. The ball rolled harmlessly away. "Can you or can't you?" Andrew asked. Defeat tasted sour as Neil crouched by his racket. "I'm done." Andrew left the goal to meet him, but stopped with one foot on Neil's racket. Neil tried to pull it out from under him, but he didn't have the strength. He was even less successful in his attempt to push Andrew off, and that hurt so much his vision crackled black. "Get off my racket." "Make me?" How do I say this? A question mark. "Make me?" Andrew asked, spreading his arms in invitation. "Try, anyway. Don't tempt me." "Such fierce words from such a little creature," Andrew said. "You're not very bright. Typical of a jock." "Hypocrite," Neil said. Andrew gave him a thumbs up and pushed past Neil. Neil tried to catch himself before he tipped over, but his hand wouldn't hold his weight. He fell flat on his back and didn't even try to get up. He was too tired to care anymore, so he lay there and listened as Andrew left the court. The door banged closed behind him. Neil rolled his head to one side and watched through the walls as they left. When he was sure they were gone, he painstakingly cleaned up the court. His arms were throbbing as he peeled his uniform off, and getting dressed again was almost too much to handle. "Damn," he whispered. He'd gone too far today in his determination to keep up with his teammates. If he couldn't control himself and take it one step at a time, there was no way he'd be able to play by the time August rolled around. Get a sip of tea. Guys, please follow me on YouTube so I can do this on live on YouTube instead of TikTok. I don't think I like doing this on TikTok. It's too hard to read the comments because they're sideways. Okay. He ran back to Wymack's place, keeping his pace slower than usual, and took the stairs up to the 7th floor. The apartment door was unlocked, and Wymack was waiting for him in the hall with a can of coffee grinds in his hand. Oh, I love this scene. Kevin called ahead to say you wouldn't be on the court tomorrow and that I should entertain you with clips of past games. He said you tried to blow your arms out against Andrew. I said you weren't that stupid. Which one of us is right? I might have gotten carried away, Neil said. Wymack tossed the coffee to him. Neil caught it instinctively, but he couldn't hold on to it. It bounced off the floor at his feet, and the lid popped off to spill grinds everywhere. Wymack stalked toward Neil with a snarled, "You idiot!" Retreating from a furious older man was so instinctive Neil didn't realize he'd flinched until Wymack froze. Wymack's face went almost dangerously blank, and Neil dropped his gaze. He was careful not to look away from Wymack entirely. He needed to see when Wymack started moving again. He waited for Wymack to say something. After an endless, brittle silence, he realized Wymack wouldn't speak until he did. "Today was my mistake," Neil said quietly. "It won't happen a second time." Wymack didn't answer. He didn't come closer either. At length, he pointed at the ground in front of him. "Come here." "No," he said when Neil started to reach for the mess at his feet. "Leave it." Neil stepped over it and went to stand in front of Wymack, within arm's reach, but just barely. He'd perfected that trick as a kid. He could look at anyone's arms and judge the safe distance from them in a heartbeat. If they had to move to hit him, he had enough time to dodge. Either way, he wouldn't catch the full intended force of their blow. "Look at me," Wymack said. "Right now." Neil dragged his stare up from Wymack's chest to his face. Wymack's expression was still too blank for Neil to feel safe, but he knew better than to look away. "I want you to understand something," Wymack said. "I am a loud, grouchy old man. I like to yell and throw things, but I don't throw punches unless some punk is dumb enough to try me first. I have never, ever hit someone without provocation, and I'm sure as hell not going to start with you. You hear me?" Neil didn't believe him, but he said, "Yes, coach." "I'm serious," Wymack said. "Don't you dare be more afraid of me than you are of Andrew." Neil could have told him it was Wymack's age that made him such a problem, but he didn't think Wymack wanted to hear it. There was no solution to that problem. "Yes, coach." Wymack gestured over his shoulder and stepped aside. "I already ate, but I haven't put the leftovers away yet. I'll take care of this. You take care of you." Neil ate to the sound of the vacuum. Wymack was in his office by the time Neil was done, and Neil retired to the couch early. He wanted to get his bag and go through his folder, but he didn't want to intrude on Wymack's space, so he stared at the ceiling until he finally fell asleep. It took Neil 2 weeks to decide he'd never meet Kevin's standards. It got to the point where he saw Kevin's look of cool disapproval every time he blinked. Half of the time, Neil didn't know what he was doing wrong, and the other half he couldn't change. He clocked a faster mile than any of them, but they were better and stronger than he was. Kevin knew Neil was inexperienced, but he didn't forgive Neil for his mistakes. Neil didn't want pity, but he did want understanding. When he caved and asked Nikki for advice on how to deal with Kevin, Nikki only smiled and said, "I warned you." It did nothing for Neil's fraying patience. Luckily, being angry at himself and loathing Kevin's condescending version of coaching meant he didn't have time or energy to be afraid. 2 weeks of playing with a dysfunctional group, and Kevin still gave no signs of recognizing him. All Kevin cared about was how short Neil fell on his court, and as far as Neil could tell, it was shorter and shorter by the day. 2 weeks of Kevin's scornful dismissal and rude commentary wore away at Neil's resolve to take it easy. He didn't care if he blew out his arms again, if it meant Kevin would stop riding him like he was an incompetent preschooler. Everything was for Exie, from his early morning run to the hours he clocked at the gym to the afternoon scrimmages to the longer run he took in the evenings after dinner. He made loops around the campus and went up and down the stairs in the stadium. No matter what he did, he was too slow, and he went to sleep in so much pain every night he could barely change for bed. By the time his 3rd week started, he couldn't even sleep because he was too busy analyzing the day's mistakes. One night, he cast aside his blankets in disgust and left the apartment. It was pitch black out, probably somewhere around 2 a.m, and it was just cool enough he should have changed out of his pajama pants. He warmed up quickly as he set off for Palmetto State. There were a few streetlights around Wymack's neighborhood, but when Neil reached Perimeter Road, the winding street that surrounded Palmetto State, the path was better lit. Neil knew the way to the stadium by heart, even in the dark. There were a couple cars in the parking lot, as usual, and Neil thought he saw the moving figure of a security guard in the next lot. He punched in the code for the Fox's entrance and opened the door, then stilled with his hand halfway to the light switch. The lights were already on. Belatedly, he realized he'd passed the cousin's car. He was so used to seeing it here when they met for scrimmages, he hadn't thought it out of place. He frowned over his shoulder at it, wondering if Wymack had heard him leave, and called the others to check on him, then pulled the door closed and jogged for the locker room. He checked every room, but found no sign anyone was there. He stretched out in the foyer before pushing through the back door. He heard the sound of a ball ricocheting off the wall. But with the stadium seating rising up to either side of the Fox's entry hall, he couldn't see where on the court the others were. He was almost to the inner court before he finally spotted Kevin. Kevin was alone, at first fourth, with a bucket of balls, and he was systematically heaving them at the wall. Neil watched in silence, wondering what odd sort of drill he was doing. It took Kevin a dozen shots before Neil realized he was trying to rebound them all from the same spot. Kevin was honing his right-handed aim. Watching Kevin... Ugh. It's always so hard to speak after taking a sip. No one's here probably because I'm on chapter 4. And that's okay. I just would rather record this on TikTok, I think, than just on my phone. But if you subscribe to my YouTube channel, I can go live on YouTube. And then I can stop doing this. Maybe I'll make a Discord too, so that people know like when I'm going live, and I'll have a schedule and everything. But this is only my second time doing it. Okay. Watching Kevin going at it in the middle of the night, fierce and merciless, was almost enough that Neil forgave him. Kevin was more demanding of himself than he was of anyone around him. He set his standards impossibly high and tried for them with everything he had, and he didn't understand why others wouldn't do the same. Neil was watching Kevin, but it didn't take him long to realize someone else was watching him. He didn't have to look to know who it was. The intensity of the other man's stare set his nerves on edge with its weight. He didn't turn to see where Andrew was, but raised his voice enough that Andrew would hear. "Won't you play with him?" "No," Andrew said, somewhere to Neil's left. Neil waited, but Andrew didn't elaborate. "I think you'd benefit more if you did." "And?" Neil slowly turned, dragging his gaze along the empty home bench to the seats behind it. Andrew was sitting in the first stairwell about 10 steps up. He was leaning forward, arms folded across his knees, as he stared Neil down. The blank expression on his face was startling. It had been weeks since Neil last saw him sober, and he'd gotten used to Andrew's drugged mania. Neil almost accused him of violating his parole again before he remembered what time it was. Andrew had likely come off his drugs to sleep. More interesting than Andrew's calm demeanor was the baggy t-shirt and sweatpants Andrew was wearing. Andrew wore long sleeves to pick Neil up from the airport, and Neil had only seen him in court gear since then. Now, without bulky armor and gloves in the way, Neil could finally see Andrew's trademark accessories. Black bands that covered his arms from his wrist to his elbows. From what Neil heard, they were a sarcastic joke meant to help people distinguish the twins from one another. Why he had them on in the middle of the night, Neil didn't know. He didn't have to ask. Andrew knew what he was looking at. He tucked 2 fingers into the band on his opposite arm and slid free a long, slim blade. Metal glinted in the overhead lights as Andrew pushed it back under the dark cloth a few seconds later. "Is that your slow attempt at suicide, or do you actually have sheaths built into those?" Neil asked. "Yes." "That's not the one you tried to cut Nikki with. How many knives do you carry?" "Enough," Andrew said. "What happens when a referee catches you with a weapon on the court?" Neil asked. "I think that's a little more serious than a red card. You'd probably get arrested, and they might even suspend our entire team until they think they can trust us again. Then what?" "I'd grieve forever," Andrew deadpanned. "Why do you hate this game so much?" Andrew sighed as if Neil was being purposefully obtuse. "I don't care enough about Exy to hate it. It's just slightly less boring than living is, so... Ugh, my goodness." Okay, this is deadpan Andrew, though. I got this. "I don't care enough about Exy to hate it. It's just slightly less boring than living is, so I put up with it for now. I don't understand. That's not my problem." "Isn't it fun?" Neil asked. "Someone else asked me that same thing 2 years ago. Should I tell you what I told him? I said no. Something as pointless as this game is can never be fun." "Pointless," Neil echoed. "But you have real talent." "Flattery is uninteresting and gets you nowhere." "I'm just stating facts. You're selling yourself short. You could be something if only you try." Andrew's smile was small and cold. "You be something. Kevin says you'll be a champion. 4 years and you'll go pro. 5 years and you'll be court. He promised coach. He promised the school board. He argued until they signed off on you." What?" Neil stared at him, blood rushing in his ears as he tried to make sense of Andrew's words. Andrew had to be lying to him. Kevin couldn't have said such things about him. Kevin could barely stand to be on the same court with him as far as Neil could tell. What good did it do Andrew to say such obvious lies? Was he trying to rile Neil up? "Then Kevin finally got the okay to sign you, and you hit the ground running," Andrew said. "Curious that a man with so much potential, who was so much fun, who could be something, wouldn't want any of it. Why is that?" If Andrew was telling the truth, then Kevin had definitely lied to all of them, and Neil could only guess at one reason why he'd go to such great lengths. Maybe Kevin remembered him after all and was saying whatever he had to in order to recruit Neil. But if that was so, how much did Kevin know? How much did he understand or remember about what had happened 8 years ago? Did he know Neil's name? Did he know what that name meant? "You're lying," Neil said at last, because he needed that to be the truth. "Kevin hates me." Or you hate him, Andrew said. I can't decide. Your loose ends aren't adding up. Not a math problem, but I'll still solve you. Oh, sorry. That's like the cheesiest line ever, but... Neil turned away without another word. Kevin was gathering his balls, finished with practice. When Kevin started for the door, Andrew moved behind Neil. Neil heard cloth rustle as Andrew stood, and Andrew's shoes tapped quietly on the stairs as he came down to inner court. You are a conundrum, Andrew said. Thank you. No, thank you, Andrew said as he slipped past Neil without a look back. I need a new toy to play with. I'm not a toy. I guess we'll see. Kevin had his helmet off as soon as the court door closed behind him. He looked right past Andrew to Neil. Neil stared back at him, looking for the truth on Kevin's face, looking for some reason behind Andrew's big words. Kevin couldn't have heard their conversation all the way out in the court, but Neil still expected him to call Neil by his real name. Instead, Kevin said, Why are you here? I wanted to practice, as if it will help you any. It was rude, but it was exactly what Neil needed to hear. Andrew had lied to him. Neil could breathe a little easier as he watched Kevin set the bucket of balls on the ground at his feet. Kevin set his racket and helmet on the home bench to undo his gloves and arm guards. Andrew took them as Kevin peeled them off, tucking the gloves under his arm and looping his fingers through the straps of the guards. He snagged Kevin's helmet by the safety grating across the front and watched Kevin collect his racket again. Andrew, Kevin asked. Ready already? Andrew said and started for the locker room. Neil didn't watch them leave. He sat on home bench and stared at the court, listening to the door close behind them. He reached over and picked a ball out of the bucket, turning it over and over in his fingers. Court, Neil whispered, then gave himself a violent shake. He squeezed the ball until his fingers ached, mentally retracing his steps backward. He went to Arizona, then across Nevada to California. He remembered the black sands beach along California's Lost Coast, where his mother finally gave up the fight. He hadn't even realized she'd been injured so badly after running into his father in Seattle. She'd bled most of the way through Oregon, but he hadn't thought it was serious. He hadn't known she was bleeding out on the inside. A kidney and her liver ruptured, her intestines bruised beyond repair. He didn't know when she'd figured it out, if she'd known by Portland that something was seriously wrong, but was too scared to stop, or if she hadn't seen her death coming until they crossed the California border and she started losing consciousness. She should have gone to a hospital, but she turned them down the treacherous path to the Lost Coast instead. They stopped 6 feet from the tide, and she made him repeat every promise she'd ever dragged out of him. Don't look back, don't slow down, and don't trust anyone. Be anyone but himself, and never be anyone for too long. By the time Neil understood she was saying goodbye, it was too late. She died, gasping for one more breath, panting with something that might have been words or his name or fear. Neil could still feel her fingernails digging into his arms as she fought not to slip away, and the memory left him shaking all over. Her abdomen felt like stone when he touched her, swollen and hard. He tried pulling her from her seat only once, but the sound of her dried blood ripping off the vinyl like Velcro killed him. He burned the car instead, dumping every emergency case of gasoline they'd bought along the way onto the seats so it would scorch her down to the bone. He hadn't cried when the flames caught, and he hadn't flinched when he pulled her cooling bones out. He filled her backpack with everything that was left of her, carried her 2 miles down the beach, and buried her as deep as he could. By the time he found the highway again, he was numb with shock, and he lasted another day before he fell to his knees on the roadside and puked his guts out. Somehow, he'd made it to San Francisco, but he only stayed a day before setting off for Millport. He took it 1 step and 1 mile and 1 day at a time, because anything else was too much for him to handle in his grief. Very dark. Oh, what's happening? Okay. Neil stared at the court in front of him and swallowed twice, against the nausea that was crawling up his throat. This was why Wymack's contract, Kevin's lofty ambitions, and Andrew's words meant nothing in the end. It didn't matter what they offered or promised him. Neil wasn't like them. He was nothing and no one, and he always would be. Court wasn't for people like him. He'd take what he could learn and enjoy it while he could, but this was a dream he'd have to wake up from eventually. Wanting anything more than that would just make it harder to walk away. He dropped the ball back into the bucket and went up to the locker room. After making sure Kevin and Andrew were really gone, he changed into his uniform and headed to the court for drills. He wore himself out, putting every thought he had into the moves he was making so he couldn't think about the Foxes or court or his past. When he was finally done and had cleaned everything up, it was after dawn. He was too tired to go back to Wymack's and knew he'd just get back when Wymack was watching the morning news, so he showered and dressed and fell asleep on one of the Foxes' couches. He woke up again around noon and headed back to the apartment. His keys got him into the building, but Wymack's door was unlocked again. Neil considered bringing up Wymack's lax security with the coach, and then forgot all about it. Even with the door just a couple inches open, he could hear furious voices arguing. He put an ear to the crack and held his breath, straining to make out the words. "Damn it, Kevin, I said sit down." "I won't," Kevin shot back. If Wymack hadn't said his name already, Neil wouldn't have recognized his voice. Kevin's voice was twisted with fear and panic. "How could you let him do this? I don't have any say in this, and you know it. Hey!" There was a hard thud as bodies hit the wall, and Neil took advantage of the struggle to slip inside. He closed the door as quietly as he could, but his stealth was a wasted effort. It sounded like Wymack and Kevin were knocking over everything Wymack owned, and Neil winced at the sharp sound of shattering glass. "Look at me," Wymack demanded. "Look at me, goddamn you, and breathe. I warned Andrew he was going to come for me. I told him. It doesn't matter. You signed a contract with me. He could pay off my scholarship in a heartbeat. You know he would. He'd pay you off and take me home, and I can't go back there. I can't. I won't. I have to go. I should go now before he has to come for me. Maybe he'll forgive me if I go back. If I make him hunt me down any more than I have already, he'll kill me for sure." "Shut up," Wymack said. "You're not going anywhere." "I can't tell Rico no." "Then don't say a word," Wymack said. "Keep your mouth shut and let me and Andrew do the talking." "Yes, Andrew. Don't tell me you forgot about that psycho. I've got Betsy's number on speed dial. Want me to put you through to her office so you can talk to him? Want to tell him you're thinking about going back?" Silence followed that. Neil waited, holding his breath, until Wymack spoke again. He was quieter this time, but concern made his voice more gruff than comforting. "I'm not letting you go back there," Wymack said. "Nothing says I have to. Your contract says you belong to me. He can send us all the money he wants, but you have to sign off on it before it means anything, and you're not going to, okay? You let me and Andrew worry about Rico fuckface. You worry about getting your game and your team where they need to be. You promised me you could get us past the 4th match this year." "That was before," Kevin said, miserable. "This is now. The ERC is giving us until June before they break the news. They saw how many security issues we had over the transfer, so they're waiting until everyone's here where I can keep an eye on them. I told you because you need to know, but I need you to keep it from Andrew until then. Tell me you can see Andrew today and not completely freak out." "Andrew will figure it out. He's not stupid." "Then you have to be the better liar," Wymack said in a hard voice. "The ERC is looking for a reason to take him away from us, and you know they won't give him back. Then where will you be?" They were quiet for so long, Neil thought they might be done. Finally, Kevin said, "Give me your phone." "If you think I'm going to let you use my phone to call him, you—" "Jean," Kevin cut in. "I have to call Jean. I have to hear him say it." "Oh, there's a kitty cat. Hello, this is Darwin. Darwin is here to beg for his dinner, even though he shouldn't eat for another hour." Darwin, you just interrupted a very intense scene in the book. Okay. "Jean," Kevin cut in. "I have to call Jean. I have to hear him say it." Apparently, that was an acceptable compromise because Wymack stopped arguing. Oh my goodness. Excuse me. Neil looked over his shoulder, wondering if he should make a break for it. He didn't know what was going on, but it had to be awful if it brought Kevin this far off his condescending perch. He was debating how quietly he could slip out the door when Kevin spoke. Kevin's bleak tone brought Neil up short, as did the French Kevin was speaking. "Tell me it isn't true," Kevin said. "Tell me he didn't." Kevin could hear the answer, but the sharp slap of the phone snapping shut again said it wasn't the one Kevin wanted. The crouch creaked under someone's body weight, and Neil imagined Kevin sinking onto the cushion in despair. "Wait here," Wymack said, and a few seconds later he stepped into the hallway. He started a little when he spotted Neil at the end of the hallway, but said nothing. Neil watched as he disappeared into the kitchen. He recognized the sound of Wymack's liquor cabinet by now, the click of the lock and the soft clink of the glass doors. Wymack returned with a handle of vodka and dropped it off with Kevin. "Drink," he said from out of sight. "I'll be right back." Because yes, you should give your... teach him about alcoholism. Wymack came back to the hallway. Neil pointed over his shoulder at the door in question. Wymack followed Neil out of his apartment and closed the door behind him. Neil looked down the hall for stray eavesdroppers, but the doors were closed. "I wasn't going to tell anyone else until June," Wymack said. "How much did you hear?" "Kevin's having a nervous breakdown," Neil said. "I don't know why." "Edgar Allan put in a transfer request with the ERC, and it was approved this morning. They're part of the Southeastern District, effective June 1st. It took a minute for Wymack's words to make sense. When it clicked, Neil's stomach bottomed out. It'd been hard enough facing Kevin in Arizona. How could Neil risk meeting Rico, too? Just because Kevin didn't remember Neil didn't mean Rico wouldn't either. Kevin didn't want to find out the hard way if Rico had the better memory of the two. "That's impossible," Neil said. "Not really. They're the only NCAA team in West Virginia, so it was easy as a vote and a couple signatures." "It's impossible," Neil said again. "We can't play the Ravens. What sane board puts the best and worst teams against each other?" One that knows there's a lot to gain from it, Wymack said. Kevin's transfer created a lot of backlash, but it also generated a lot of new interest in XC. The ERC wants to follow it through to the natural conclusion, Kevin and Rico's reunion on the court, but this time as rivals for the first time ever. It doesn't matter who wins. They know what publicity and funding they can score with such a move. I can't play against Rico, Neil said. I'm not ready. Rico isn't your problem, Wymack said. Leave him to Matt. Your problem is getting around his backliners and goalkeeper. Can't you protest? Neil said. They're setting us up for a match. Everyone knows we can't win. I could, but it won't do any good, Wymack said. The ERC doesn't do take-backs, especially when it means spurning a Moriyama. There's something you need to know about the Moriyamas, but I didn't want to have this conversation with you yet. I wanted you settled a bit more, or at least hope you'd get to know the team better before I drop this on you. Now that the ERC is forcing my hand, I don't have a lot of choices. What I'm going to tell you is an open secret. That is, we know it. He waved a finger in a circle, likely meaning the Foxes, but no one outside our team does. It has to stay that way no matter what. Do you understand? People could get hurt if this gets out. People could die. Because this is not just a college sport. This is college mafia sport. Neil waved over his shoulder at the apartment doors. What about them? I'm the only one on this floor, Wymack said. They built this complex around the same time we started construction on the Foxhole court. Thought our team would be something and people would want to live in the area and be close to the stadium for games. Then we couldn't perform, so the apartments didn't fill. The lower floors are pretty full and the middle floors get rented out during football season, but the top 2 floors are pretty bare and no, you can't break into any of them, so don't even think it. Neil let that accusation go without comment. You're stalling, coach. Wymack folded his arms across his chest and stared at Neil. Do you know why Kevin came to Palmetto State? He broke his hand, Neil said. He couldn't play, so he transferred here as an assistant coach. I assumed he was following Andrew. I brought him here, Wymack said. He showed up at my hotel room at winter banquet with his hand a bloody mess. He didn't want us to notify the Ravens or take him to a hospital, so Abby bandaged him up as best she could, and I put him on the bus back to South Carolina with us. That doesn't make sense, Neil said. How do you get from the ski resort to your hotel? He wasn't in the mountains, Wymack said. But he broke his hand in a skiing accident, Neil said. Bullshit, Wymack said. It wasn't an accident. Neil stared blankly at him, and Wymack gave a short nod before explaining. The ERC had an end-of-year meeting a few days before the Southeastern District's winter banquet. The NCAA advisors got everyone talking about Rico and Kevin. They had some concerns about the season, they said. They were sure Rico was holding Kevin back, that Kevin was selling himself short so as not to outshine Rico on the court. They wanted to know if it was Coach Moriyama's doing. In response, Moriyama pitted Rico and Kevin against each other. Rico won, Wymack said. But I'm thinking he didn't get it fair and square. If he had, maybe things would have turned out differently. As soon as Coach Moriyama dismissed them for the night, Rico broke Kevin's hand. It was like getting punched in the gut. What? Wymack dragged his thumb along the back of his hand, tracing the path of Kevin's injury. Kevin doesn't talk about his time at Evermore, but I could tell it wasn't the first time Rico or Moriyama laid a hand on him. It was just the first time Kevin was smart enough to pack his bags and walk away. So much for family, I don't believe in family. Neither do I. He meant it. Neil finally understood that look Wymack sent him in Millport. That perfect understanding that undid Neil's defenses. Defenses? Neil searched his face, looking for the story behind that exhaustion. Whatever broke Wymack happened so long ago, he wasn't even bitter over it anymore, but he was definitely still cracked if he poured so much time into the Foxhole court. Why doesn't anyone else know what Rico did? Neil asked. Because Rico is a Moriyama, Wymack said tiredly. This is where it starts getting messy. He thought for a minute, then held up his index fingers. The Moriyama family is broken in half, the main family and the branch family. The main consists of the firstborn sons, and the branch is for everyone else. Coach Moriyama, Tetsuji, heads the branch family, and his older brother Kengo heads the main. Kengo has 2 sons, Ichiro and Rico. Because Ichiro was born first, I really hope I'm saying that right. I'm going to be so embarrassed if I'm not. He stayed with Kengo in the main family. Rico was born second, so Tetsuji became his legal guardian, and Rico became part of the branch family. Follow? I think so. Families are estranged, Wymack said. My goodness, this is... I never realized Wymack talked for so long. The families are estranged, Wymack said. Kengo and the main family are up in New York, where Kengo is CEO of an international trading company. One day, he'll pass the business to Ichiro. Tetsuji and Riko get a kickback of the profits, but they're considered unimportant and have no say in any business decisions. That's how Tetsuji had the freedom to study in Japan and develop Exi. So long as he doesn't do anything to damage the family's reputation, he is free to do what he likes, and what he likes is to create the most awful and powerful team in the nation. This is all public knowledge. Neil looked past Wymack at the door, thinking of Kevin's freakout. And the truth? The real Moriyama family business is murder. Neil shot a quick look at him. Wymack held up a hand to ward off any questions, his expression grim. The Moriyamas are an immigrated Yakuza group. Do you know what the Yakuza are? They're Japanese mafia. Kengo's father brought the group to America a couple decades ago and set up shop up north. I don't know what all they're involved in, and I don't want to know. I don't know how much even Kevin knows, since he's attached to Riko and the Branch family, but Kevin knows the main family uses Raven Games as a cover for big meetings. So many people go in and out of Edgar Allan that it's a convenient way to bring in their far-flung contacts. They've got VIP lounges along the upper floors where they make deals. They're a gang, Neil said slowly. Wymack nodded, watching him carefully and waiting to see how Neil took it. Neil barely noticed the attention. He was thinking back to the last time he'd seen Kevin and Riko together. He remembered scrimmaging and arguing footwork with them. Their game came to an abrupt halt when they were called upstairs. If Neil closed his eyes now, he could remember every detail of the room they went to. From its floor-to-ceiling tinted windows to the heavy conference table dominating it, the floor was carpeted, but someone had laid a tarp down on top of it to catch all the blood. Neil finally knew where he'd been and why. He'd never understood how they went from Exi practices to murder, or why Kevin and Riko were there too, but if the Moriyamas were a gang, it made sense. Neil's father worked out of Baltimore and held the eastern ports with an iron grip. His territory's western border would have ended at West Virginia. In that sense, he was Tetsuji Moriyama's neighbor, and that would have brought him to Kengo's attention. Neil's father and Riko's father were business partners, and that's why Neil was allowed to practice at Edgar Allan Stadium. Wymack interpreted his long silence as fear. I'm telling you this because everyone else here already knows the story from Kevin, but don't worry about the Yakuza. Like I said, Kengo and Ichiro mostly keep to New York and couldn't give a flying fuck what Tetsuji and Riko do. The only way it's relevant to us is explaining why Tetsuji and Riko are violent and rotten. They have a lot of power behind their name and a rather twisted view of their place in the world, and we happen to have something of theirs. Kevin, Neil said. I'd hoped they'd thrown him away, Wymack said. Everyone said Kevin would never play again. Edgar Allan had to release Kevin from his school contract because of the severity of his injuries, and Tetsuji didn't argue when I took Kevin on as an assistant coach. I thought they were ready to let him go, but Tetsuji didn't take Kevin in out of the goodness of his heart. He raised Kevin to be a star. He put a lot of time and money into Kevin's development on the court. As far as Tetsuji is considered, Kevin is valuable property. Any profit Kevin makes is rightfully the Moriyama's. But Kevin's handicapped. He's still a name, Wymack said. Neil's head was spinning as he tried to sort it all out. He wants Kevin to transfer back? If he wanted Kevin to transfer, he'd just say so, Wymack said. Kevin wouldn't really go back, Neil said, disbelieving. Not after what Riko did. Wymack gave him a pitying look. Tetsuji never formally adopted Kevin. Do you know why? Moriyamas don't believe in outsiders or equals. Tetsuji took Kevin in and took over his training, but he also gave Kevin to Riko. Literally. Kevin isn't human to them. He's a project. He's a pet, and it's Riko's name on his leash. The fact that he ran away is a miracle. If Tetsuji called tomorrow and told him to come home, Kevin would. He knows what Tetsuji would do to him if he refused. He'd be too afraid to say no. Neil thought he'd be sick. He didn't want to hear any more of this. He'd already heard too much. He wanted to run until it all started making sense in his head, or at least until the ice left his veins. Then why go through all the trouble of changing districts? The Moriyamas are ready to cash in on their investment, Wymack said. No one honestly expects Kevin to make a comeback, but he signed with us to play. His arrogance is inspiring, and this year he's still a star. If he can't keep up and perform, the fans and critics will move on and forget about him. Tetsuji thinks he'll burn out, so he has to seize the moment now. Our teams are going to make a fortune this season. People are going to be hounding us every step of the way and gambling on our games. There will be TV spots and merchandise, all kinds of publicity stunts. Tetsuji is pitting Riko and Kevin against each other, knowing how it'll end. He'll put it all on the table and let his Ravens destroy us on the court. Rake in the winnings, establish Riko as the superior player forever, and relegate Kevin to the has-beens. Neil swallowed hard. What if Coach Moriyama told him to stop playing? Wymack was quiet for an endless minute, then said, Kevin only had the strength to leave because Riko destroyed his hand. That was finally one injustice too many. Because of that, I'd like to think Kevin would defy Tetsuji, but it's just as likely we'd never see him with a racket again. But the day Kevin stops playing forever is the day he dies. He has nothing else. He wasn't raised to have anything else. Do you understand? We cannot lose to the Ravens this year. Kevin won't survive it. We can't win against them, Neil said. We're the worst team in the nation. Then it's time to stop being the worst, Wymack said. It's time to fly. You don't really think we can, Neil said. If you didn't think you could, what are you doing here? You wouldn't have signed the contract if you'd already given up on yourself. Wymack half turned away. I need to make sure Kevin's not cutting his wrists open in there. It's probably best if he doesn't see you right now. I can call Abby to come get you if you want to hang out with the others, but I need you to keep this a secret from your teammates until June. I need time to figure out how we're going to handle this season. I won't say anything, Neil said, taking a couple steps back. And don't worry about me. I'll go for a run or something. Kevin should be out of here by 4, Wymack said. That's when Andrew's done with Betsy, so Nikki will pick him up on his way over to her office. Neil nodded and left, taking the stairs back down to the ground level. Neil thought it would be awful if Kevin remembered the boy with the murderous father, but this was worse. This was Kevin maybe remembering that boy when Kevin belonged to an equally horrific family. Neil didn't remember the Moriyamas, but they definitely remember him if they'd done business with his father. The butcher of Baltimore wasn't a man easily forgotten. Neither was his wife, who'd stolen $5 million the night she ran away with the butcher's only son. The butcher turned his people inside out for years, hunting them down. All of his contacts would have heard of it. Somewhere, the ERC was reworking and finalizing a schedule that put the Moriyamas in Neil's near future. Neil would quit before that match. He had no choice. He'd play up until their game against the Ravens and then run. If he was lucky, the match would come at the end of the fall season, so he wouldn't jeopardize the striker line too much by taking off. It was stupid and suicidal to stay even that long. Neil knew he should go now, before he met his teammates or the ERC published his name or he ever stepped on a court with Kevin Day at his side. It seemed an acceptable risk before, since none of his father's people were into sports. The chance of one of them seeing him on TV during a match was negligible, so long as Kevin didn't figure him out and give him away. Now that he knew who the Moriyamas were and knew they would be watching him, it made absolutely no sense to stay. Neil had grown up wondering why Kevin and Rico were in that room 8 years ago and how they'd overcome it. He'd wondered why their luck and circumstances were so different that they'd become international stars, while Neil's life spiraled so quickly out of control. He'd hated and worshipped them all his life, jealous of their successes and desperate for them to excel. Now it seemed he'd been wrong all along. Kevin hadn't escaped either. No matter what they did or who they became, maybe they never would. Neil shoved the stairwell door open so forcefully it banged against the wall and was running before he was even halfway across the lobby. He hit full speed before he reached the street, going so fast he was nearly falling over, but he couldn't outrun his thoughts. Okay, that's the end of chapter 4. I'm going to finish this, upload it to YouTube, and pray that it sounds better than it did last time. And if it's any good, I'll do chapter 5. And if it's not, I'm still going to do chapter 5. But maybe next time I'll do it as Neil. Would that be fun? Do you guys want to see me read this as Neil? Or I could do Andrew. Or I could do Aaron. Should I do Aaron? We'll see. We'll see. Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed. Everyone. I think did I end it? What do we do? Swipe left. Oh, I didn't end it. Oh, I'm glad you liked it. Okay. Well, you can listen. You can re-listen to it on YouTube if you missed the beginning. Okay. Bye-bye. How do I end the live? I keep